We expect a lot from our homes. They're more than a place to hang your hat. They're where you try your hand at gardening and new recipes, where you rest and recharge, where you work and play. And that's why at Home Advisor, we're committed to keeping your home up and running. Whether you need to repair an overloaded appliance or you're looking to create a backyard retreat worthy of a summer staycation, use the Home Advisor app day or night, and we'll find a local pro to get the job done right. Whatever you need, we'll do everything to fix your, well, everything. Download the Home Advisor app to get started.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin today with breaking news in the national lead. We are expecting a press conference from the FBI and local law enforcement officials any minute now on the investigation into the killing of George Floyd. And this afternoon, Minneapolis officials and community leaders are calling for calm as what started as peaceful protests after police killed Floyd, an unarmed black man, turned destructive with dozens of fires reported last night in the unrest. Floyd, of course, died after being pinned to the ground by a police officer, the officer's knee seen on his neck for 8 minutes, even as he was saying that he could not breathe. The video sparking widespread anger over police brutality and racial injustice in the United States. The vice president of the Minneapolis City Council, Andrea Jenkins, saying today, the protesters have every right to be angry, but no right to cause harm. And she said that racism should be declared a state of emergency and a public health issue.
Until we name this virus, this disease that has infected America for the past 400 years, we will never, ever resolve this issue.
A lawyer for the Floyd family says that his loved ones also want peace. All 4 officers involved in the killing of Floyd have been fired. But earlier today, Floyd's brother emotionally explained to CNN that there needs to be far more accountability.
That was my oldest brother. I love him. I'm never going to get my brother back. We need justice. We need justice. Yeah. Those 4 officers need to be arrested. They executed my brother in broad daylight.
The White House earlier today said that President Trump is being briefed by Attorney General Bill Barr and by the FBI on the Floyd death, and that the president was, quote, very upset after seeing the video. Let's go straight to Sarah Seidner, who's live for us in Minneapolis. Sarah, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey is calling on the National Guard to help with the protests. Tell us about what you're seeing on the ground right now.
Jake, you can see why. This was a Wendy's just a few hours ago, but burned to the ground. There are businesses all the way through and down the street that are completely burned. Snike, if you'll turn this way, you'll see the AutoZone where the first fire started. We watched this fire start. It went up last night, and you are seeing destruction upon destruction upon destruction. There was a lot of looting as well. Last night, though, it really, really exploded. People so angry about what happened with police and George. In the aftermath of an explosion of anger born of pain, an apology today from Minneapolis' police chief.
I'm absolutely sorry for the pain, the devastation, and the trauma that Mr. Floyd's death has left on his family, his loved one, our community here in Minneapolis, and certainly across the country and the world.
Minneapolis streets turned into a battlefield for a second night over the death of 46-year-old George Floyd. The protesters first aimed their anger at police inside the precinct responsible for the arrest. Protesters' water bottles and rocks and fireworks were met with tear gas, flashbangs, and rubber bullets.
They've been shooting me I'm talking about all day.
By nightfall, the skies lit up with fire, several buildings engulfed. Across the street from the precinct, another scene, a Target looted for hours until the inside was a smoky shell of itself. George Floyd's brother issuing a plea to protesters, but also understanding.
I want, everybody to be peaceful right now, but people are torn and hurt because they're tired of seeing black men die.
And the events leading up to his brother's death were captured for the world to see. Officer Derek Chauvin's knee pressed on Floyd's neck as he struggled to breathe. I can't breathe. At one point, the 46-year-old man in agony calls out for his mother.
car. Mama. Get up and get in the car right.
The city's mayor calling on the county attorney to prosecute the arresting officer.
Do you think that was murder?
I do.
You do?
I'm not a prosecutor, but let me be clear. The arresting officer killed someone.
So far, Chauvin and the 3 other fired officers have not commented on the case. Police have now released their complaint history. Only 2 officers have complaints lodged against them. Chauvin has the most with 18 complaints. He faced no discipline in 16 cases and was reprimanded for 2. Officer Tu Tao has 1 complaint still pending, 6 total lodged against him. He was sued for brutality in a 2017 case that settled out of court. Their last arrest ended in the death of a man pleading to let him breathe. The only body cam video released so far is from another department. And that video from the Park Police, you can see really nothing of the incident, so it is unhelpful in trying to give more information. What you can see now out here is, again, this is the auto zone that started burning last night, and just across the street is where the 3rd precinct is, and you will see that today, more protests, more people out here saying that justice needs to be served. Now, we are expecting a press conference from the FBI in just a few minutes here. People are saying, look, we understand that there have been arrests in this case, very swift arrests for the 4 officers, but they want more. They want to see charges. They want to see this go to trial. Jake?
All right, Sarah Seidner on the ground for us in Minneapolis. Thank you so much. Joining us now to discuss, as we wait for the law enforcement press conference, Van Jones, CNN political commentator, and Laura Coates, a CNN legal analyst. Laura, let me start with you. We know this press conference is coming any minute. It will include the FBI, but also the Hennepin County attorney, who would theoretically be the person to bring charges against any of these officers if that were to happen. What are you expecting from this event?
Well, given the swiftness of actually the firing of the officers, if the Hennepin County attorney is inclined to pursue charges, which there is evidentiary reason to at least have probable cause to do so, she'll likely outline the reasons why each charge would be there. For example, under the umbrella of murder, you've got the idea of whether it's intentional or not, if it's premeditated or not, whether it's reckless disregard for human life, which 7 to 9 minutes of somebody's knee on someone's neck obviously shows a disregard for human life or the sanctity of it. I expect her to outline the reasons why there'd be probable cause findings in this case, and also an examination briefly about whether the FBI would be looking at a color of law charge, which is what the FBI in terms of federal legislation looks at to say, is there some reason to believe that this officer, under the color of the uniform, under that badge, was using that as a means to deprive someone of their constitutional rights? The evidence seems to indicate that. We'll have both of those explored today, I'm sure.
And Van, 2 nights of protests in Minneapolis, 1 person fatally shot, businesses on fire, officers using tear gas, rubber bullets, then more protests in Los Angeles and Memphis over the death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd. How are you reacting to what we're seeing nationwide?
You know, it's been horrific. I haven't seen the Black community this impacted, this upset since April 29th, 1992, with the Rodney King verdicts coming down the way that they did. You have to go back that far. Everybody that I talk to is sad. They say they're tired. There's a judgment against people, frankly, like myself, who've been saying, hey, we're going to pass laws. They say they don't want to hear that anymore. They don't believe it anymore. And this is from top to bottom. People have lost faith. When you see a lynching, that, as far as we're concerned, that lynching of a Black man in broad daylight, and something broke in this country when he died in that way. And so those of us who've been working inside the system, who've been saying, hey, we're changing laws, we've got bipartisan support, things are moving in a positive direction, they don't believe us anymore. And something there has to be federal legislation, there have to be arrest convictions, and we have to look in our own hearts. How do we get to this place?
And Laura, Minneapolis police policy allows neck restraints, but only when a suspect is actively resisting. From the cell phone video and security footage we've seen, there's no suggestion that George Floyd was actively resisting. In fact, you repeatedly hear him say, I can't breathe, as the officer has his knee on his neck. If these officers can prove that there was some kind of resistance at some point, might that complicate the task of the Hennepin County attorney were he to bring charges?
It's a consideration, but it would not be a full explanation or a defense of behavior. Resisting suffocation is not resisting arrest. And let me be clear with that. The code and the policy of the police officers is that they have to use only the amount of force necessary to repel a force against them. This is a man on his stomach, handcuffed behind his back, gasping for air, calling out for help, bystanders looking at the same scenario and saying he cannot breathe. And following the shooting death of Jamar Clark just a few years ago in Minneapolis, the actual policy manual of the PD department in Minneapolis changed to then require a duty to intervene of fellow officers who were looking at their colleagues, viewing the use of force. And if the amount of force being used was either excessive or no longer necessary to restrain someone, then they had a duty to intervene. Hence the probably rapid firing of the other officers who were on the scene. But I touch on one thing that Van talked about in the history of America. You know, I'm from Minnesota. The home I owned was 4 blocks from where this man was killed. And I look at this and think we are 100 years from the anniversary of a tragic lynching of 3 black men in Duluth, Minnesota. That led to significant changes in Minnesota, including that police officers, because these 3 men were removed from police custody by a mob and lynched, that there was some legislation that was created to try to hold those officers accountable for actions taken in front of them. Now we're 100 years later. Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, and countless other people outside of Minnesota find themselves still victim to an idea of police apparently turning a blind eye. This is a community where we usually use the term, my cup runneth over, to exude some form of joy. Well, here it's the cup running over of the exhaustion, of the trial and tribulation of waiting for justice to not only be a sentiment, but actually achieved.
And Van, the Minneapolis Police Department has been the subject of frequent complaints about excessive force. You heard Laura mention some of the more notorious incidents. Derek Chauvin, the officer who put his knee on Floyd, had 18 complaints against him, only 2 of which merited disciplinary action. He's been fired, Chauvin. But how do we prevent this from happening again? You talk about how people are exhausted with the concept of, okay, this law will do it or this law will do it. How do we make sure there are no more incidents like this?
Well, I tell you what, I don't have a great answer. I'll tell you this. We thought we got an answer. It's called body cams. That if we just put body cams on all these cops and you could see what they were doing, that they would either stop or that the public would be so outraged. These guys knew they had on body cams. There were people standing there with the cell phones out. 18 complaints should trigger a separate review. Just because you couldn't get all the way to disciplining the officer, demoting the officer, or firing the officer doesn't mean that the aggregation of those complaints should not trigger a separate review in a well-run department. This is not a well-run department. And unfortunately, there are very few well-run departments. The reality we have now is we've got to look in the mirror. In order for that level of contempt for life to take place in broad daylight with officers and bystanders and nothing be done, that's the tip of a very big iceberg of disrespect, of contempt for human life, and a pattern and a practice from coast to coast where when someone gets out of a car, they're African American, they're that tall, and frankly, I'm a little bit tall myself. They are presumed to be a threat, and everybody knows the script. Whatever you do to subdue that person is going to be considered, quote unquote, okay. But in this case, he's not running. In this case, he doesn't have a weapon. In this case, he stopped. Whatever he did 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, 4 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, 6 minutes ago, 7 minutes ago, he is begging for his mother, and nothing is done. That lets you know that doesn't happen just out of the clear blue sky. You built up to that level of contempt. You built up to that level of dehumanization and desensitization. And you're now witnessing the outcome of that, of all these other little incidents that we're gaslit and told as black people didn't really happen. or maybe he could have done this, or maybe she could have done that. But why did she say this? All these little things